Hi class. In this video, we're going to look at creating your very first application using Visual Studio. We're going to use Visual Studio 2017. Visual Studio 2015 is presented in your textbook, and you shouldn't see much difference. I'm located on my Start menu. And the first time you run Visual Studio 2017, it'll ask you for your language preferences. And if you pick C#, it'll kind of customize the environment for you for C#. It's not completely necessary though. Now, in C#, when it first opens up, you'll notice right away that it is a complete IDE, integrated development environment, and we have lots and lots of different areas of the screen and windows that we need to become comfortable with. First of all, we have the Getting Started or Start Page window showing right now. We see its tab right here below our menu bar and our toolbar. And in the Start page, we have some options even for creating new projects for the very first time. We're going to bypass those options so that we can use the menus like you're shown in your textbook. There's also an area of the Start screen that shows you some developer news, always interesting stuff, tidbits from Microsoft if you want to keep up with things. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to ignore this Start page and use the File menu and say that I want to create a new project. Notice you have several options here under your New menu. And if you want to start a whole new Visual Studio application, you want a project. When we say we want a new project, Visual Studio displays the new project dialog box, and we have lots and lots of options available. Over on the leftmost window, make sure you have Visual C# selected, and you have other language choices and lots of options, so always make sure you're looking at Visual C# or you can have some unexpected results. Once you've chosen Visual C#, the middle of the window will be loaded up with templates that are available, and templates are kind of sample projects or skeleton projects that you could use as a starting point. Now on the far right, the screen displays a description of whatever template you have currently selected in the middle. Right now I have Console App .NET Core selected, and it tells me this is a project for creating a command prompt, command line application. And since it's .NET Core, it can run on multiple platforms. I could also choose Console App, which is a console application that is a command line app that would only run on Windows. So not too much different. I'll go back to this .NET Core, and either one is fine. Now down at the bottom of the screen is important information about how I want to set up my project. First of all, my project is considered a solution, and there is a solution name here in this area, as well as the project name. We'll name our project Hello World. Notice I'm using upper camel case, where I have an uppercase letter starting each word, including the first word. Now, my solution name was set to the same thing as my project name. That's fine. You'll experiment with these things and see how they affect the project that's generated for you. My location is not exactly where I would like my project to be saved, so I'm going to click Browse. And I have a second hard drive that I'd like to use, and it's going to be in my Documents folder, Visual Studio 2017 Projects, and I'm going to select that folder, and now that should show up here as the location where my project is going to be created. Visual Studio is going to create a folder or directory for that solution, and the folder will be named Hello World. I'm going to click OK to create that project. And when my project is created, I'm going to first look at some of the different windows that are available in Visual Studio. My project code is in this code window that's taking up the majority of the screen. My code is contained within a file named program.cs, and I can see that with this tab up here that's holding my code file. Now, some other windows that are available. This error list window would show me if I had any errors. a properties window that isn't super important to us at this point in our development, but will become really important to us later. And then another really important window is the Solution Explorer screen. And you can tell it's already got information about our project. It says up at the top what our solution name is, what the project name is that's part of that solution, and then our code file can be found under our project name, and we're always looking for the file that's .cs, because that stands for C#. And when we see our .cs file, we know that's our code file. So again, it says program.cs, that's the file name, and the file name on our tab. If this file weren't showing up in the code area, in the code window, I could just double click on it and it would show up. So gone, find my Solution Explorer, double click on program.cs, and I see my code file is back. Now, what if my Solution Explorer window is completely gone? It just disappears. It's gone. There's another one to show up there. I'll get rid of it. Now, what I can do is use my View menu and activate the Solution Explorer window again. And notice by default it goes right back where it was. We'll talk about that here in a second. Before we do so, let's look at this very first C# program. When we look at our code, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, we see up at the very top this using statement. The using statement is a compiler directive, and it tells the compiler to load the system namespace, which is a solution that was created for us already, and it's part of the C# library set. So that compiler directive is handled by the compiler, and it copies all that code into our program. Now we're going to add another using statement. This is going to be a static using statement, and they show it to you in your textbook. In the static using statement, we'll copy a code library into our program and eliminate the need for us to name the code library. So we're going to use a static using statement for the console class. Now it's a little different than what C# has generated for us, and we can make some further changes. But before we do so, let's look at what else is left in our code. This code was generated for us, remember, by C# when we said we wanted to create a new console project, because it's the skeleton of a console project. And it says hello world. Hello world being an important first application for us in any language. Now, as I look at the different lines of code besides the using statement, the first thing I see in my code file is this namespace statement. We talked about it in the lecture. This is a required statement when we're using Visual Studio. Name the solution. And our namespace statement has specific syntax. It starts with the keyword namespace, and then we can name that namespace. And underneath the keyword namespace, we have an opening curly brace. And then at the bottom of our solution or namespace, we have a closing curly brace. So that would be the end of our namespace. All of the code within our .cs file should normally be contained within this namespace. And if we start working with multiple .cs files in our project, they're going to need to be part of the same namespace to be related to each other. Now, underneath the namespace, we have our class statement. The class statement defines this object, because remember, C# is object-oriented. Class defines the object. Well, in our case right now, our object is our program, and that's why by default Visual Studio has named this class program. Notice that the class statement also has an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace that delineate the beginning and the ending of the class. So here is the end of my class. Next, I have my main method. And my main method looks a little different than the main method in my textbook, mostly because of this data within these parentheses. So I can delete that and have it match up the textbook a little bit more. Causes me no trouble at this point in time. This method is named main. We've declared it as static, meaning there will only be one copy of it in memory at any given time. And we've said it's void. It's not going to return any data to any sort of caller. So this is the main method. Remember, our main method is the entry point to our program in C#, so we have to have it. Next, we actually, want to identify the end of our main method. Our method, just like our class and our namespace, is delineated by a pair of opening and closing curly braces. So I will label that N1. It's the end of my main method. Now, within my main method curly braces is my method body. My method body of this program only consists of one line of code, the console.writeLine statement that says I want to output this string hello world. Let's run this program. It's a console program, so when I run it in Visual Studio, we should see the console screen display. Oops, super fast. Didn't get a chance to see our hello world message, did we? Well, there's a couple of things we can do to fix that sort of issue that we have. It's not a problem, because if this program were to be run outside of the Visual Studio environment at the command line, the message would display and the command line would continue displaying. So we're just in a little bit of a different environment because we're within Visual Studio. So I have some options. First of all, I can always run my current program by pressing F5. I'm going to press F5, you can't tell, but I did. Got the same results, right? Popped open that console screen and it closed real fast. Now I'm going to hold the control key while I press F5, and you'll see that this time Visual Studio keeps the console window open and it displays a message automatically after our program has finished running. So our program issued this message, hello world, and then Visual Studio said, oh, press any key to continue, and held the screen open for us so that we could see our message. When you press Control F5 like that, you do disable some of the capabilities of Visual Studio. So we want to try one other way, and this is the way of keeping the console screen open that our textbook recommends. And they use a statement called ReadKey. And ReadKey is also part of the console library, just like the WriteLine statement. Now, notice with my WriteLine statement, I have the keyword console dot in front of the WriteLine to say, hey, find the console class, and in that class library, find the WriteLine method and run that for me. The WriteLine method says, okay, and outputs whatever string was passed within the parentheses to the console. So that's what the WriteLine statement does. The ReadKey command is also part of the console library, but if you notice, I haven't prefixed it with the keyword console. And that's because I added this using static system.console statement up to my declaratives at the top. So if I don't use the keyword console, Visual Studio and the compiler will resolve that reference for me and say, oh, I find this ReadKey method in this console library that was statically bound to this program. Okay, so I'm going to run this program again. This time I'm going to use the green run arrow so that you can see me click on it. And we should see our message display. And then the screen stay open, waiting for that ReadKey statement to execute. And the ReadKey statement will execute if we press a key. So I can press any key and make that happen. So will the WriteLine statement still work properly if I get rid of this console keyword? Let's try. Because we've added this using static system.console statement, it will still work. And notice it's more compact code, just a little bit easier to read. So that's why we're using that using static. But it is not necessary. We can put console dot as a class specifier in front of these console statements. Press F5 to run our code. We see it still works and says hello world. Now, while we're looking at C# this first time, we should try a few errors. I'm going to make some simple errors. First, I'm going to get rid of this semicolon. Now, as soon as I do that, notice that my error list window shows an error. When I say click on the error, I'll see people click on this link. This link will take you to a website that will describe what CIS150 error code is. That's not what you want. You want to click on this error message, the description, and that'll take your cursor directly to the line in the code where Visual Studio has found the error. So if you notice, it's pretty easy here looking at it. My insertion point, my blinking cursor is sitting right here where I have a red squiggly line telling me that a semicolon is expected. So I will put that semicolon back in, and then everything will be happy with the world and I won't have any errors anymore and I can run my program. Now, what if I do something else? Let's try some of our other common errors. I'll get rid of this closing parenthesis on my hello world string. Again, Visual Studio tries to be really explicit. It says a closing parenthesis is expected. It has even highlighted with red these closing curly braces for me to say all of this stuff is an error. I don't know what you want. You've got this red squiggly line here, and until you fix that, I just can't figure out what's going on. Now, I can double click that description. Again, that'll take me to that point in code. If I try to run my program right now, it's going to say there are errors. Do you want to run the last successful build? Well, since I've run my program successfully already, I could say yes, but that would just run the old version. So it's not running my newer updated program. So I'll say no. That would normally be what I'd want to say. Now in my hello world, I'll go ahead and add my closing parenthesis. We should see that error go away. Now realize there's very little code here on this code file, so it's pretty quick to respond to the fact that the error was corrected. If we get a lot of code, it can take Visual Studio a second or two longer to determine that the error has been corrected. So you will see it kind of resolve those problems as we go. Now inside our parentheses, we have our double quotes. Let's get rid of one of those. Again, error. Now this one is a little bit different, isn't it? Notice that we couldn't quite figure out as well what was going on. It's given us 3 errors for that one little problem. So how come Visual Studio was able to tell us exactly what was wrong when we were missing a semicolon or when we were missing a period, but when we're missing the end of the string, it really can't tell as well? Well, that's because when the compiler encountered this opening double quote, the compiler said, oh, a string is beginning. This is part of the string, and as it's reading through our .cs file, saying, oh, all this stuff is part of the string, Look, it's still going on. It still thinks we're still part of that string. And it's not until it finds this second semicolon, we don't know why, some sort of logical reasoning that the compiler programmer thought made sense, that it determines something's wrong. It's like, I don't know, you should have had a parenthesis or a comma or something, but you've done something wrong here. So the compiler can't always tell us exactly what's wrong. Sometimes it can, sometimes it can't, but we have to really think about what it's saying. So if we say, oh, there's a new line in the constant, what's a new line? That's where we go to a new line in our code, meaning we pressed enter. So the compiler sees that as we're having this string here, we've pressed enter. That's unusual. So do you really want that new line there? And then from then on, it kind of is aware that there's something wrong, and it tries to tell us, but it can only figure things out so much. So we'll put our double quote back in and close that string off so that it doesn't keep wandering down into the next line of code, so that Visual Studio can figure out what's going on. So we can have some errors that are really, really identifiable by Visual Studio, and we can have some that are a little bit harder to figure out. As the programmer, we've got to determine what those things are. And of course, we wouldn't put errors in our program intentionally, so they're usually a little tricky to find because we think that we did everything right. That's kind of our normal line of thought. Now, in this program, I only have some ending comments where I've noted the closing curly brace. I like to do that for beginning programs. And then I have some inline comments for different areas of our program. We need to up the game a little bit and put in some really strategic commenting. And this is the kind of commenting that I would like to see you get in the habit of doing. First of all, at our namespace level, if we type 3 slashes, Visual Studio will generate the summary statement for us, and this is an XML comment that will show up when we're using the IDE if we were using our program in another way. Now, that's a little bit beyond us right now. For now, just know it's really, really good. So up here at the top of my namespace, I'm going to put something like what this program is. I'll just say program, that's okay. It's Hello World, and the developer is me via Visual Studio. I don't know what to put there. What's the reference Visual Studio generated for us? We'll leave it blank because everybody knows that. Now, the date developed is going to be the date that I began writing this program, depending on what we're working on. Our development could take quite some time. Now, the purpose of this program is going to be to say hello. And now I've got some nice documentation for my program, and I'm saying for this namespace, no matter how many different classes or extra files I include, my overall documentation is this information here. Now, I want to add some documentation for my class. So I can click on my class, press enter to open up a new line, and I'll type those 3 slashes. And again, Visual Studio gives me the XML comment summary, and I'll say this class runs my program. And then for my main method, same thing. The main method is the program starting point. Now I have some XML documentation created for each of the different components in my program, and if somebody else were to look at it, they would be able to see what's going on. Great, awesome. Now, when I'm working with Visual Studio itself outside of C# in any sort of mode, Visual Studio does some helpful things for me. First of all, these lines over here on the side are yellow to show me that I have code that has not been saved. These green areas show me code that has been saved. So if I want to turn everything green, I can click on Save All. And when I'm using Visual Studio, I pretty much always want to use Save All because my code is only one part of my project, and there are pieces that Visual Studio is building for me behind the scenes that I want to make sure get saved along with my code. So I'm always going to choose Save All. Now everything's all turned green, it's all happy. Each of these different areas of the screen is a different window, and they are movable. Right now, if I look at my code window here, you can see that it's pinned, right? So I can unpin it. Now I should be able to move this around. I could move it over to my second monitor if I wanted to, have my code over on one side of the screen, and that becomes more important as we do more development. Now I can also try to put it back where it was. This little widget in the middle will help me do that. I want it to go back to where it was, which was the middle. So with my mouse over that middle area, I'll release my mouse button and that'll pop it back to where it was. Now, is it pinned? Can I move it? Oh, I can still move it. So if I want to pin it again, see, notice I didn't put it over that toggle. or widget, so I ended up with it not in exactly the right place. With my mouse over the widget, with my mouse button pressed, I'll release, and then I am back to taking up all of the screen area that I wanted. I can pin my code window back down to Visual Studio to this workspace area so that it can't move around anymore. Now, what about my Solution Explorer? I have some options. Most of these options are available for all our different windows. We looked at the pin. What about Auto Hide in Window Position? Notice with Window Position, this drop-down menu, I can say that Solution Explorer can float, which is basically kind of unpinning it, right? And I can say that it can dock. Oop, now it's not exactly where I want it, is it? Let me move it, and using my widget, I'll say, oh, I want it in this top section, and I got it back to the right place. Now, another thing that I could do is make it tabbed, and now I have it sitting over here with my program code as a separate tab. I'm going to put it back. I want it way over here, and I want it up at the top. And just kind of try manipulating some things and see how things move around for you so that you can get used to the way it works. The last thing I wanted to try then is making it auto hide. And if it auto hides, then it's hidden over here at the side of the window, kind of out of the way. And if I want it back, I can just click on that link and then it'll display. Now, I want to go ahead and change that back to one of those other options, huh? Well, sometimes it just gets to be crazy with all of these moving things around, right? You can move and move and move. So what you can do if things get really out of hand and you can't find anything, on your window menu, you can choose the option to reset the window layout, and that'll put everything back to the way it was originally. Now, on the other hand, if you have moved things around and you just love the way it's looking, you can save that window layout and then you could apply it later. So your window layout is really important as a developer, and as we use more and more of these different Visual Studio windows, it will become critical that you be productive at moving things around. Make sure your error list window is always displaying. If you have an error and you're not looking at this window, it can be kind of tough on you to figure out what it is. And then lastly, we have some really nice curly brace coloring here. I'll show you how to take care of that in another video, how to add that option. So that was my first program. I really didn't write much code. I told Visual Studio that I wanted to create a C# console application, and by default, C# generated this Hello World program for me using the console.writeLine statement. I made a few small changes and added a lot of comments, all the comments of course being in green, so that we could identify some different parts of our program and what's going on in those different parts. You want to, as a beginning programmer, comment the majority of the lines of your code so that you can look back at the code and see what's going on. So it is a catch-22. Many comments can make things look complicated, so you can, drop those down, close them if they're in your way, and then you can open them back up if you want to see them later. So when we're looking at Visual Studio, we can use these plus and minus signs to close or roll up and roll out different areas of our code. So Visual Studio is a complete integrated development environment. It does tons for you. It's one of the most popular development environments in the world, probably the most popular. I hate to come out and say that, how we are about Microsoft and all. But there's a reason that if you look online, people will say things like, it's almost as good as Visual Studio. Remember, Visual Studio cost a lot for developers for many, many years. It's just recently that the Community Edition has become free of charge. So that's a reason that we've seen C# take a huge jump in use, because developers, of course, prefer this environment. If the price is right, that's what everybody's going to try to use. So welcome to C#. You're going to really like it. You have a lot of tools available to you. Take a look at this program. Think about the different lines of code, and we'll be back to talk about Chapter 2. Thanks.